Hi, I'm New World Now podcast host Kim Corbin. I recently had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Corinne Zupko about her book, From Anxiety to Love, a radical new approach for letting go of fear and finding lasting peace. I hope that you'll enjoy the interview. I'd like to start by having you tell us about your personal journey with anxiety and what it was like before you started applying the ideas in your book to your life.
I was a mess. I was overwhelmed with constant anxiety, panic attacks. I was really on the high end of the anxiety continuum with really being debilitated by the feelings. And the panic would feel like my heart would race, I'd be shaky, I'd be sweaty, and I just had a constant feeling of dread and fear all the time. It was painful and really uncomfortable.
Many of the ideas that you offer in From Anxiety to Love are based on A Course in Miracles. Will you tell us about how A Course in Miracles first came into your life and a little bit about what it is?
I was introduced to A Course in Miracles by my mom, and she tried to introduce it to me when I was a teenager, really before the bad anxiety set in, and I would do this. Speak to me in English like you used to. I'm not interested in this spiritual stuff. But it wasn't until I broke down with panic and anxiety that I was willing to try anything. And she offered me the book again, and I said, I'm game. I'll give anything a go, because it's all about undoing fear and releasing the fear blocks in our mind to return to the love and peace that's already in us. So that is how it came into my life. And it's a book. It has 3 parts: a textbook, a workbook, and a manual for teachers. The workbook has a lesson for every day of the year, so there's 365 lessons. And the manual is for all of us, because we're all students and teachers. The text is a little bit more theoretical, but it's really a pathway of totally remembering love.
And there's a lot of Course in Miracles groups that help people deal
Definitely. There's a lot of groups that help people digest it. I have a lot of resources on my website, including a study group that I do over the phone, so it's very well, there's a support system.
Big community. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you say that to move from anxiety to love, we have to learn to distinguish between the 2 voices of our mind, the voice of love and the voice of fear, and choose the voice we want to listen to. So you tell us a little bit about the characteristics of those 2 voices.
We can kind of think about like the voice of fear over here and the voice of love over here on this shoulder. And the voice of fear we're very familiar with. That's the voice that tells us we're not good enough, that others have it better, that is the voice that has judgmental thoughts, fearful thoughts, worry thoughts, everything that we're very actually accustomed to, the thoughts that constantly go through our mind. The voice of love is actually much quieter, but it's always there, and it's a constant peace. It is a voice that tells us of our innocence, and it is a voice that brings us into a state of completion when we listen to it. We can use it as guidance. We can turn to it to listen to the guidance that this voice gives. It might be a feeling, not a voice, but it's something that we can get better attuned to with practice.
Is it the same thing as our intuition?
I think intuition is a good substitute for folks who might not gravitate to terminology like inner teacher or inner guide. Maybe that's a more secular way of thinking about it, is intuition.
Mm-hmm. And you say in the book that anxiety is a great indicator of how closely you're identified with the ego. If we're feeling anxious, we can be sure that we're lost in ego.
It's a barometer. Anxiety is a barometer. So the more anxious we are, the more we're listening to that fearful voice. The less anxious we are, the more we're opening ourselves to turn to and listen to and be able to hear that voice of love in our mind.
Mm-hmm. I never had thought about it like that. And one of my biggest takeaways from your book is the realization that we don't have to master our anxiety or fears, but it's really about finding peace by mastering love. Will you tell us more about that?
That's fabulous news, because if we had to master fear, that would take lifetimes. If we had to work on every single fear that we had in our minds. Mastering love means learning how to listen to this quiet, still voice within and choosing a miracle, choosing a shift in our minds where we shift our perception from fear to love, where we express love. And so that shift restores us back to peace.
Mm. And what practical advice do you have to offer those who suffer from panic attacks?
I would say remember that panic happens in time. So there's a beginning and there's an end. It might feel really intense and really uncomfortable, but it's going to come to an end. All the principles I talk about in the book you can use anytime, and of course you can use them when you're in a state of panic, but oftentimes the arousal state is so high, it can be really helpful to place your hands on your chest and your belly and just soften your belly. We tend to grip our belly and then breathe from really high up in our chest, and that becomes a very shallow and an anxious breath. So just by changing our belly, just by softening our abdominal muscles, that can start to bring about more of a state of calm more quickly than when we're staying up in this short and shallow breath.
Good advice. And what would you say the biggest lesson that you've learned through your anxiety is?
The biggest lesson really is that it's helped me learn that that's not who I am. That voice of fear in my mind is not my voice. It's not me. That real voice is that voice of love in me. And that's what my book is there to help, is to shift this identity. Shift our identity from the voice of fear to the voice of love, because that's what we really are, is love with a capital L.
And what do you most hope readers will take away from your book, From Anxiety to Love?
Hope. If I can make a shift like this from being completely knocked off my feet and debilitated by anxiety, if I can make a shift where now I'm flying on airplanes without medication, without my husband, I'm doing things that I never thought I could do fearlessly, I want to just have readers walk away with hope that if Corinne can do it, I can too.